Welcome to the Wisconsin Humane Society's Guide to Muzzle Training. Acclimating your dog to a muzzle, whether or not you have behavior concerns, is an excellent idea, as it is a great life skill for all dogs to have. There are lots of reasons to muzzle train. You may muzzle train in case your dog becomes injured, because it is necessary for some types of travel. It can prevent your dog from eating things off of the ground that may make them sick, and it's an excellent safety net if your dog may display aggression towards people or other dogs. There are a few supplies that you will need to complete this training. Ideally, you should have a treat pouch. You will need an abundance of high-value treats, such as hot dogs or cheese. A squeeze tube, like the one shown in the picture, will give you added ease of treat delivery. This is optional, but we would strongly recommend it. You will also need a basket muzzle that fits your dog appropriately. It should not push on their nose. They should be able to open their mouths to pant, drink water, and easily take food through the front of the muzzle. As previously mentioned, you will want to make sure to use a basket muzzle for this training. The most appropriate type of muzzle to use will be that well-fit basket muzzle that allows your dog to pant, drink water, and take treats through the muzzle. Before you begin training with the muzzle, you will want to teach your dog a verbal reward marker. In this video, we will use the verbal reward marker, yes. You are going to teach your dog that when they hear that word, that they are going to receive a piece of high-value food. Take a few moments before you begin training and simply say yes, then hand your dog a piece of food. Do this several times in a row. Your dog does not need to be doing anything in particular, like sitting or laying down. We are merely teaching them the connection between hearing this word and receiving food. Our first step will be to teach our dogs that the muzzle is a predictor of food. With your dog out of the room, place the muzzle on the ground and scatter tasty treats around it. After you have done this, let your dog into the room and let them come explore the muzzle and eat the treats without you putting any pressure on them or touching the muzzle. If they choose to move away, that's absolutely okay. They can come forward to investigate, eat treats, and retreat as they see fit. In this video, you can see that the dog readily approaches to nose the muzzle out of the way to access the treats. He is comfortable and confident in this space. You will want to practice this for several days until you see that your dog walks up to the muzzle with no hesitation to eat the treats. Once you have achieved this, you can move on to the next step. Once you see that your dog is showing a high level of comfort with the previous step, you can begin to increase your criteria, and you can start to reinforce them for making the choice to independently interact with the muzzle. You will now begin to use the verbal reward marker, yes. Place the muzzle on the ground and don't scatter food around it. When your dog approaches and touches it, say yes, and then feed them. You will begin to feed them every single time they make the choice to look at, touch, or paw the muzzle. You may only be able to do this for short sessions because we do not want your dog to get confused and frustrated. So periodically, go back to doing the food scatter that you did in the previous session. In this video, you can see that the dog clearly understands that targeting the muzzle results in receiving reinforcement. Every time he looks at, touches, paws, or noses the muzzle, I say yes and give him a piece of food. In the beginning, your dog will not show this level of fluency, and that's okay and expected. Reinforce them every time they make the choice to interact with the muzzle, and soon you will begin to see that they understand exactly what they need to do. Notice in this video, I'm reinforcing Percy's decision to interact with the muzzle with his nose or his paws. In the beginning, this is fine, But shortly after your dog begins to understand that interacting with the muzzle results in them getting food, you will want to increase your criteria and only reinforce when they make the choice to touch the muzzle with their nose. Now that we've created a reinforcement history for a muzzle that is on the ground, we are now going to pick up the muzzle and ask our dogs to interact with it while we are holding it in our hands. For the next step, when your dog approaches the muzzle, you are going to offer them food through the front of the muzzle. As long as their nose is inside of the muzzle, you should be constantly feeding them. You should not reach towards the straps or attempt to keep it on their face. If they choose to move away, allow them to do so. You can see that in this video, the dog readily comes forward, places their nose inside of the muzzle to eat the food. Because he's willing to eat constantly, I occasionally give him breaks by taking a piece of food, tossing it away, so that I can assess whether or not he chooses to come back. If he does choose to come back, I will continue to constantly feed him out of the muzzle. Once you reach this step, be sure to practice for a short session every single day. Once your dog is comfortable and readily coming forward to put his nose in the muzzle, you are ready to move on to the next step. Don't be afraid to take several days or weeks practicing this step if your dog is not comfortable with the muzzle. Once your dog is readily coming forward and placing their face in the muzzle for the constant flow of treats, you can begin to increase criteria. You will now present the muzzle, and when they come forward and place their face inside, you will say yes, and then reach for your food and feed them. We will now have the goal of beginning to develop them making the independent choice to place their face inside of the muzzle. As this continues to develop, you may wait a moment or two before saying yes and reinforcing, so that they slowly begin to understand that they should place their face in the muzzle and keep it there.
Yes. 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 Good. Yes. 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 Yes.
Now that your dog is readily coming forward, placing their face in the muzzle, and ideally maintaining that behavior for a few seconds before you say yes and reinforce them, we can work towards strapping that muzzle on. We will approach this step very, very slowly, as we want to make sure that their level of comfort remains high. While your dog's face is in the muzzle, you can move your hand just a little bit, and you may not even reach towards the muzzle at first. If they keep their face in the muzzle, immediately say yes, and then offer them a piece of food. Slowly, you will work towards reaching towards the muzzle, touching the straps, pulling the straps around their head, and eventually buckling those straps. If your dog pulls away, that is completely okay, and we want to make sure that they have that choice at this point in our training. If your dog is struggling and repeatedly walking away from the muzzle, be sure to decrease the level of difficulty and do more easy repetitions before you ask them to cope with your hands moving going forward.
Yes. Yes. Good girl. Yes. Good girl.
Once you reach the point where your dog will maintain their muzzle behavior, while you take the strap, reach around the back of their head with it, and potentially even slide it through the buckle, you are ready to strap the muzzle on for the first time. Remember, if at any point they move away, allow them to do so, and then go more slowly with the subsequent repetitions. When you do strap it on for the first time, be sure that you are ready with a very high value treat that you can feed them constantly through the muzzle. Keep in mind that feeling the full weight of the muzzle on their face for the very first time can be very disconcerting, and you will need to be prepared to support your dog with that high-value reinforcer that you will feed them constantly. Only have the muzzle on their face for a few seconds while you feed them constantly, then take it off and celebrate that success. For many sessions, you will only have this on your dog's face for a few seconds while you feed them constantly, and you will still make sure to practice the easier steps regularly as you continue to build up your criteria. Eventually, you will want to work up to your dog being able to stand right in front of you for up to a minute while you feed them with the muzzle strapped onto their face before you move on to the next step. While the dog in this video is very willing to work collaboratively with the trainer, he is very tense, he leans back slightly, and at one point he even flinches when they reach out and they touch him. When the muzzle is on his face, he drops his head down low because the sensation is uncomfortable for him. It is likely that you will see this type of body language in the beginning with your dog. This is an indicator that you need to move slowly, be sure to give them many easy repetitions practicing the previous exercises, and keep your sessions extremely short when you have the muzzle actually strapped to their faces. Until you see a high level of comfort when they are standing right in front of you wearing the muzzle, you will not want to move on to the next step. Once your dog is very comfortable wearing the muzzle, standing right in front of you, getting fed regularly, you can then begin to teach them to move while wearing the muzzle. This is the point at which many dogs begin to paw at the muzzle, so we want to be sure to support them heavily during this step. In this video, I am using food that is very high value that can be easily eaten through the muzzle. I start off with feeding my dog right in front of me, and then I take that food and use it to guide her a step forward at a time, reinforcing her as we move. I use the food as a guide to teach her that she can comfortably move forward while wearing the muzzle, and at the same time, we're reinforcing her very, very heavily for that experience. Once my dog is able to successfully and comfortably follow me in a straight line as I guide her with food, I can begin to complicate that movement. I might use food to guide her in a circle, to lure her into a sit or down, or guide her with food to do other known behaviors, like sit pretty. Every single time she's successful, I reinforce her with food for that choice. If at any point she stopped, became uncomfortable, or began to paw at the muzzle, I would move back to an easier repetition. Once my dog is able to perform more dynamic movement, while I use food to guide her, I can begin to ask her for those same known behaviors with a verbal or visual cue, rather than using food to create the behavior. I will still say yes and reinforce for every repetition immediately after she achieves those behaviors. Remember, if she begins to paw at the muzzle, it is simply a sign that I have gone too fast, and my next repetitions need to be easier for her. Keep in mind that each of these examples would be things that I would do for several sessions in a row. So getting from the point where your dog can follow you while you move backwards with food as a guide to the point where you can ask for sit, down, spin, or sit pretty without food as a guide may take several days or weeks. We should also continue to periodically have very easy sessions with the muzzle, where you go back to basics and give them sessions where they can be highly successful without experiencing any stress. Once your dog is comfortably moving through space indoors while wearing their muzzle, we will begin to practice wearing the muzzle outside and in novel spaces. Now that your dog is very comfortable working inside with the muzzle, put on their normal harness, collar, or leash that you would take them outside on, and then confirm that they are still comfortable wearing the muzzle while wearing that item. That may mean that you have to go back to basics and work back up to strapping the muzzle on and having them wear it. Once you can see that they are comfortable wearing that item while inside of the house, pick up their leash and go outdoors. Now that you're outside, we're going to take a few steps back because working in a new environment will increase the level of difficulty for your dog. Take food in your hand that they can easily lick and chew on through the muzzle, and use the food to guide them forward one step at a time as you walk backwards. For every step forward, give them that piece of food and then grab another one for the next step. Just as we did indoors, be sure to keep these sessions short. If your dog is able to walk a few feet with you with the muzzle on, you may then take it off and continue on your walk without the muzzle. Once you've had many successful repetitions of walking backwards with your dog, you'll begin to walk forward together. You will still want to reinforce your dog at a high rate for walking with you with the muzzle on without pawing at it or attempting to take it off. Again, keep these sessions short. Walk together for a few feet, then take off the muzzle and continue on. Ultimately, you will have the goal of wearing the muzzle while out in the world for longer and longer periods of time. Even once you take the muzzle off, be sure to still reinforce your dog for making nice choices. Teaching your dog that if they make the choice to walk next to you means that they get reinforcement will mean that their behavior is more manageable overall. Now that your dog has learned that the muzzle is a predictor of good things happening to them, they've learned to put their face in their muzzle independently so that you can strap it on them, and they've learned to comfortably move through space with you while wearing it, it is now time to focus on generalization. Practice your muzzle behavior in as many different places as you can. In every room of your house, in friends' homes, at your vet clinic, at your grooming facility, and anywhere else that you can think of. Remember, every time you practice this in a new space, you may need to go back to basics and begin with simply showing them their muzzle and scattering food around it on the ground. You will then slowly build up to them actually wearing their muzzle in that space. The goal will be for your dog to be able to be comfortably and quickly muzzled in any space should it become necessary. Not only should you and can you generalize the muzzle behavior to lots of different spaces, but you can also generalize the same concept to other items. In this video, you can see the dog approaching and making the choice to put her face in a cone that is presented to her. There are lots of different things that you can use the same concept for, such as your dog's harness and collar. Be creative. Anything in your dog's life that they may need to wear, you can teach them to independently put on so that we can increase their level of comfort. If you have any questions, contact the Wisconsin Humane Society's Behavior Line at 414-431-6173. We would also recommend looking at the Muzzle Up Project at muzzleup.project.com for more muzzle training resources. Thank you so much for watching this video. Happy training!